Okay, I always like to start off with a quote. That's just kind of how I do things. So I really like this one because part of pre-qualifying is it's really about figuring out a way to do what we want to do better. And I think I remember just kind of early in my career, pre-qualifying for listings was like not a thing. If I got a call and it was like, or an email or a text and was like, "Hey, we're thinking about listing," I'm like, "Cool, let me come over." And sometimes that worked out, sometimes it didn't, and it was just wasted time. So I really like this quote because Paulo says, "When we strive to become better than we are, everything around us becomes better too." And something that my company promotes or has like this motto is bigger is not better, better is better. And I think a lot of times we get caught up in this mentality of like more conversations, more appointments, more equals more listings. The conversations part can, but more appointments without the conversations or the right conversations can just equal more time wasted or more time spent. And for me, my time, I look at my time as being pretty valuable. So I just really like this mindset. Bigger is not better, better is better. So if we can get better, our appointments are going to get better, our clients are going to get better, our income is then going to get better as well. So that's kind of where this is coming from. But why do this in the first place, right? So there really isn't much time in our life. So what do I mean by that, right? I am away from my children, my wife. Like you have non-refundable precious breaths of my life when I'm meeting with somebody, right? So just so we know, we get on average like 78 years of life, right? Hopefully we're all pushing into the 80s and 90s in this room, but that's like the average. I think it's even less for a man. So but that's 27,550 days on this earth, and I'm 40, so I've like used half of it. Okay, if you sleep 8 hours a night, a third of it is gone, slept through as well. So all this to say is to demonstrate there's just not much time. So if I'm going to be spending time with you, I am for sure, you better believe I'm going to pre-qualify you so that I have a super high degree of probability on the who, what, where, when, and the why, so that I can then make it also clear when I see you. I'm gonna make a request of you, which is going to be to hire me. So this, I think, will get us this mentality of valuing our time higher, valuing our time more, will help us kind of stop spinning our wheels, right? And we can recognize things like when a potential client isn't really certain about what they want to do, we can explore that more and then make a decision whether or not to meet with that person. So I don't know about you guys, but according to the Association of Realtors, I think the statistic is like if you go on 100 listing appointments, 20% of them are secured. Like that's a 20% conversion ratio. And I think the reason for that statistic is because we're going on too many appointments without having conversations ahead of time that could help us not go on those appointments yet. So that's kind of where this is coming from. When I was first an agent, I was kind of really nervous. I would like get real nervous about going to the appointments. And that's kind of just because I didn't know how to prepare. So there's a few purposes behind having the pre-qualification conversation. Is one, I value my time and I want to know it's getting used properly. Two, I want to know that this potential client is serious. And then three, I want to be prepared so that I know what I'm doing at the appointment, right? And being prepared is everything, because then that client, that potential client, will be impressed if I'm prepared. Or if I'm unprepared, it's going to show. Who has been there, right? Like I think we've all probably gone to an appointment, walked out the door and been like, well, that was a complete waste of time, because somebody said, well, we're thinking about maybe still renting it, or yeah, we really wanted a higher price and it looks like it's just not going to work out. It's like, well, shoot, we could have covered that on the phone. So that's what we're going to learn today. Okay. By the way, I'm trying to get my view correct here for thumbnail. So if somebody has a question at any point, just unmute yourself and say, hey, Zach, I have a question. Because I may not see like if you raise your hand or something. Okay. 5-step listing process. This might sound obvious. I just like to have this first because I think it helps frame everything. But really, it just boils down to these 5 things. It's pretty standard, pretty simple. We want to set the appointment, pre-qualify the seller by asking key questions, and those 2 things kind of happen at the same time is the ideal thing that in this conversation. After that, this is just a couple tips for you guys. Emailing a pre-listing package with relevant information about the conversation that you had and their expectations moving forward, as well as including some reviews of yourself and just references to their property as a CMA or a pre-CMA type of thing, a mini CMA. Having that sent to them ahead of time really helps when you're sitting down at that appointment. Call to confirm the appointment. I usually do that the day before, and then I'll send a text like an hour before. Why do I do that? Because people have changed schedules or they don't show up. If they're coming to me or I'm going to them, I want to just make sure, like, if there's something wrong, like somebody got sick, I want to check in before I just knock on their door. Oh, we're sick, So this presentation today is really meant for those prospects that we don't know personally, right? That we don't have a strong communication connection with. So just keep that in mind. This may not apply to every single prospect that you have. But even with those that I think you can apply a lot of this. A lot of times the conversations we think will go great because there's a personal relationship, they actually aren't thinking of us as someone who values their time highly with a profession. So that can also be dangerous. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so what we need to cover in this conversation: motivation, huge. We want to figure out why in the world do they want to sell their property? When, right? When do they want to do it? What's the timing of their situation? Who are the decision makers? Are they on the call or are they going to be at the appointment? What do they think of what's going to happen? If I'm talking to a man and he's married and she's on the deed, or if I'm talking to a family who has a trust, who are the decision makers here? We want to cover that so that we're not having multiple meetings with multiple people. And then, of course, we want to bring up price, which I know is kind of scary, but we want to do that, and I'm going to teach you how. We want to talk about condition if it's relevant based on what we learned from the price. And then we also want to just cover what they owe on the property, which I know can be kind of a scary question, like, hey, how much do you owe, or what's left on the mortgage? It feels like we can't ask about financial stuff, but we're selling a house for these people. Like, that's the goal. So we need to talk about that because then we can prepare a net sheet appropriately and really just go over everything. So that's what this conversation aims to cover. Generally, when I speak with people in this conversation, I want to make sure they have 15 to 20 minutes. A half hour is even better, and you kind of know which folks are going to be long-winded like I am, and which are going to be more like, no, we're good, and it'll be quicker. But for yourself, it's an ideal to set aside 45 minutes for this conversation, not to talk the whole time, but to knock it out in 20 minutes and then set everything up for success, like put all your notes together with that client. If you use a CRM, update the CRM, get ready for that appointment, etc., with the remaining time. Okay, so things to keep in mind when you're having these conversations. The purpose is not to disqualify. I think that a lot of times I speak with agents and they kind of think this way, like, I'm trying to get out of an appointment. That's not the idea here. The idea is we want to pre-qualify, and pre-qualifying is different than disqualifying. Disqualifying would be like, I need to end this conversation. I want to figure out why this won't work. Pre-qualifying is, how can I prepare this person and myself to do business? Big difference, right? This is a positive conversation. It's a way of developing attraction, showing your professionalism, and helping them understand their own situation better, feeling heard and feeling cared for. So what we want to do, though, is look for red flags. All right, so keep that in mind too. We'll go over what a few of those are. One big one is if someone's motivated by price only, that if that price doesn't align with the market, that can be a big red flag. And I think we've all been there. We've all listed properties because we're worried about having to buy groceries and thinking, man, I gotta list the property no matter what. And someone says, well, we want to list it for $700,000 and it's worth 550. Well, eventually they'll lower the price. I gotta get, that's fine for some people. It's not fine for me because I value my time, and spending all my time listing a property that's not going to sell and maybe will never sell. Maybe they don't lower the price. This whole conversation clues us into that before we step foot in their door. So we want to look for red flags, and we don't really want to leave a subject until it's fully covered or fully understood. So if we're talking about price and, they're kind of saying some things, but not all things, we want to learn how to ask the right questions to uncover what we really need to know. Of course, we want to be friendly and relatable. We also want to be professional and prepared to explain. So like if we're getting hit by objections, then let's think of those as opportunities to understand and be understood. So we might just have to explain something in a different way, so that objection is no longer an objection. It's just a question. Okay. All right. I think we've gone over enough background. Let's dive in. So motivation. Usually when I'm transitioning to this phase in the conversation, so our conversation might start with, hey, Zach, we've heard about you. We were referred to you by so-and-so. We're thinking about selling our house. Like, period. Or we're thinking about selling our house. Could you come out sometime next week? That's often how these conversations begin. So I have to transition, right? Yeah, that'd be great. I really appreciate the call. Thanks so much for thinking of me. Would love to set an appointment with you. Hey, before I come out, there's a few questions I need to ask just to make sure I'm fully prepared for our meeting and that I can provide the best service to you. Is now an okay time for me to go through some questions with you? That's it. I mean, that's a transition question. It's safe, it's easy. And plus, they're going to be like, well, that makes sense, but I don't have a ton of time right now. Okay, cool. Well, let's set up a time for this appointment, which is a pre-qualification call, right? So it might end right there, and you set up a time to call them back later when you know they have time and you have time. That's crucial, because you don't want to put somebody in a position where they're squeezed for time or they're thinking about the next thing they have to do. So just having the politeness or the courtesy to ask, is this a good time, is a good way to start and just kind of transition. And it makes it clear that we're about their goals, not just hammering this out. Let's go meet. Okay. So then really it's just systematically going through the questions. So again, is it okay if I ask these questions now? And I'll be brief because I know everybody's time is valuable. So, and they'll go, yeah, sure. That's great. Awesome. So the first question I have, and sometimes I'll throw their name in, right? First question I have, Julie, is, I'm very familiar with your area. I'm sure you have a nice home, and hopefully I'm not being too straightforward. Is there any particular reason that you and whoever, your family are considering selling? So is there any particular reason you're considering selling? Or, there's other ways you can phrase this, take it and put it in your own language, right? Hey, if you don't mind me asking, your home's lovely, it's in a great geographic area. I know the area well, the neighborhood's wonderful. Is there any reason in the world you're considering moving? Just kind of whatever that tone is for you. Is there any particular reason you're considering selling? And the reason we want to do that is because we want to know what their goal is, right? So someone might come back and say, if they're downsizing, yeah, really appreciate you asking, right? And you're already set apart from most agents who will just be like, okay, cool, I'll see you at your house in such and such time. And there's no opportunity to develop relationship prior to going, and it makes that meeting much harder. So I love that when they give you that kind of feedback. Yeah, thanks for asking. And they'll say something like, yeah, we've lived here for 40 years and the house is aging a little bit. We're aging, and we're just kind of tired of going up and down steps. We'd like to have a smaller home. Our kids have grown, they've moved away, right? And so now what am I doing when I'm taking notes, right? Take these notes, write this down. Don't think you're just going to remember everything. I might have 4 or 5 conversations like this every 2 weeks or every week if I'm really on my game. So have a notebook and just take notes, or be at your computer in your CRM and plug that in. Because we don't want to forget that. This is stuff we want to bring up later in the conversation to remind them why this is important if something else throws them off. Okay. How many of us have had a conversation like this, and we start bringing price into the equation, and they go, man, another agent really said that I could do more. They were willing to list for higher, or I was really, really hoping to get this much for the property, right? There's nothing wrong with that hope. But when we know the motivation and we can stay focused on it and bring that back into the conversation politely at that time, it allows the human brain to go, oh yeah, that's more important than $10,000 or whatever it happens to be. And then they also just feel cared for and heard too. So then I'll just go on, great. Thanks for sharing that with me. And just so you know, my job is to help you, not to talk you into anything. So is it an option for you, Julie, to maybe not sell the home and like maybe keep it as a rental or a secondary home? Anybody, I want to get some interaction here. Anybody have an idea of why I might ask that? I know it seems like backwards, right? Why am I suggesting they keep the home and rent it? Any ideas? Any thoughts?
To
Michael?
see if they have a backup plan if it doesn't sell.
Right. Yeah. If I want to, that's exactly right. So if they do have a backup, and most people do, like a lot of people, you're going to know right away. They're going to say, nope, this is it. This is what we want to do. Like, you're trying to understand how committed they are to this idea that they're having, right? This is someone, we might know them really, really well, and they still haven't shared their entire heart with you yet, right? Because maybe they haven't had a serious sit down with their spouse or whoever it is that is involved, right? Maybe we don't know where this conversation is happening in their world, so we need to get in there and understand. And this is a safe question to just pose. And some folks will say, well, I hadn't really thought about that. Yeah, maybe if we don't get enough money for the house, we might have to do that, you know? Okay, great. Well, let's talk about that, right? Because wouldn't you want to know now before you go any further into this and you get down a road of I didn't realize that, or so you want to know that now, right? So motivation is key. So, and I really love just saying, putting out there, I'm not trying to talk you into anything, or putting some qualifying phrases in there like, hey, I'm really not trying to be nosy, right? Finding your own language with that, your own wording with those things is really good, to bring in, because it gives them peace about that they're not being attacked or sold to, right? And everybody likes that feeling of just feeling safe with somebody else. So the next question I'll ask is, I'll do another kind of qualifying statement like that, like, that's great. My intention is asking you is not to be nosy. It's just really to determine if I can provide you with some helpful information in some way. So I'm curious, if and when you do sell the property, is your intention to stay here locally, or are you looking to go someplace else? Obviously, you don't have to ask this if they've already told you. Most people will just just go. They'll just go because we love talking about ourselves. Just look at me, um, but putting that out there, if they haven't given that information, you're going to want to know that, because it's nice to know if you want to offer to refer them to someone, you can take that a certain direction. Well, we're moving, we're actually going to move to Texas. Okay, well, awesome. Are you in a position where you might need a referral there of someone to help you purchase a home there, or do you have that already taken care of? So you can take that and run with it. And then really it's just kind of like a closing question is the last one. If you haven't fully uncovered the motivation yet, I love to just say, something like, is it an option for you to not move or not sell this home and still accomplish your goals? If it's not clear yet, that's just another way of asking, like, do you really have to sell? Like, are you really committed to selling? And then if that's kind of confusing for them, you can go like, well, is it an option for you to rent the home and still move, right? Like what will happen on the outside? Like what if another this is a great one here. What if we were sitting here 6 months from now and the house hadn't sold? What would that mean for your life? That is a really powerful question. It develops relationship, trust, and it allows them to understand and think like, wow, this person really, really, really wants to know how important this is to me. And I love telling people what's important to me. Okay. Okay. So that's it for motivation. Before we move on into timing, any questions, feedback on that, on kind of how that rolls? Hearing none, seeing no hands raised, we will move on. Awesome. Okay. So a lot of times, again, timing and some of this other information will just kind of be shared in that opening question. So, but if they don't, we run it right into it. Okay. So ideally, in terms of what you want, because really that's what's most important. How soon would you like to actually have your move take place? Right? How soon would you like to be moving? And the reason I like that question is because if I say like, how soon do you want to have the house on the market for sale? Most people don't know. They really don't know. So you kind of have to start at their end goal and work backwards so that you can then present them an effective timeline, right? So let's say you did ask, how soon would you actually like to have the home on the market for sale? They might say something like 60 to 90 days. Then you have to get clarification, right? So then you have to say, well, are you talking about getting on the market or having it sold in that time frame? So that's why, I just really like to start with, so when would you like to move? When would you like to make this move? Ideally, focusing on the motivation, if you would like, when would you like to be in Texas with your grandkids or whatever it happens to be, right? So in an ideal world, how soon would you like to be there? Okay. And they'll usually just offer it. And sometimes they'll be, well, I'm not really sure. A lot of that might depend on the price and the market and that kind of thing. Okay. So if you are presented with that kind of thing, we just want to walk them through that, right? So, but before we get there, let's say they just went ahead and answered you, right? And they told you, we'd like to be moved 90 days from now. Okay, cool. That sounds great. What's the particular reason behind that, if you don't mind me asking? Right? Like what's going on 90 days from now? Whoa, yeah, well, our son's having his 50th birthday in Texas, and we really want to be there for that, and be settled by then. Or, Christmas is coming and we want to be settled by then. Okay, great. Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing that with me. And then just move on. Like we know now. Okay. And when you move on, we can go, all right, so from what I'm seeing in the market right now, just so you're aware, if you wanted to be in Texas by 90 days from now, whatever that date is, that would mean in general, we would want to be on the market by about this date or this week, right? And so we would say in our market that, if it's a good house, that's going to be, we want to be on the market within like 45 days from then or sooner, right? So anyway, so you want to pick that apart and kind of work backwards so they have a clear picture, and then go, and that would mean we would need to go ahead and have signed paperwork and be preparing for the listing by this date. And whenever we've put forward information like that, you can always ask, does that make sense? Or am I being clear with that? Do you understand that? Does that make sense? And then they'll give you a yes or a no or a question about it, and you can go with that. So, I'm sure some of you have had conversations like this already, and the more relaxed it can be, the better. But I do like to go ahead and uncover a couple things. I'm going to refer to some notes here real quick. So if they say something like, excuse me, sorry, a little bit of coffee coming up. If they say something like 60 to 90 days, okay, just so I know, is there any particular reason you wanted to wait before we go ahead and list, right? So let's say it's a longer time period, right? Is there any particular reason they wanted to wait? There might be, like maybe they want to prepare the house, or there's something they're fixing, that's good information for us to have. And then I always like to say, if it's a long time frame, like let's say I'm talking to somebody who's like 120 days out, right? I just like to ask if they'd be willing to move it up. because a lot of times people are. So that might sound something like, okay, I got you. So let's just say that we knew through no fault of your own or mine, that just because some of the market dynamics are and how things have been changing, et cetera, it might be better to list your home sooner because of the seasonal or whatever you want to throw in there, right? It might affect how much we could get or how much we don't get. Would you be open to the idea of moving that timeline up, or is that a fixed timeline? So instead of saying like, um, gosh, I really wish we could do that sooner, which I'm sure none of you would say, we can still kind of ask in a professional way if there's an opportunity there without putting pressure on someone to just agree or resist. Okay. So that's just a little tip. All right. So once we have the timing down, we want to make notes of that and keep that in our little journal, right? And then move on to decision makers. And this is really key. I have found that this has been really key because you can do all this conversation right and set up your appointment. And you go on your appointment, you show up and like you're all smiles and dressed up and you got your CMA and all the stuff there and you're so ready because you did it all right. Man, the wife's not home or the husband's not home. It's like, oh, I've got to do this appointment for one person and then rely on that person to sell my services to their spouse. That is a disaster. Or you have to come back and do it a second time. Sometimes that's okay if like the people and you have a personal relationship with them. Sometimes that's okay. Even still, having this part of the conversation can be just a game changer for you to have more effective appointments. So I like to compliment people, especially if I don't know them. You might have to practice this before you don't sound like you're patronizing somebody, but I just like, I don't know, to me, I just like to tell people that, hey, it seems like your time is valuable, right? So I can see here that it looks like there's somebody else on the deed, right? So I'm not like prying into their life. It actually looks very professional. Hey, I've pulled the property record up here and I can see there's somebody else listed on here. Looks like so and so, right? And just so I can know, I can hear in your voice you seem really excited about selling. What does so and so feel about it, right? And if it's a spouse, usually they're like, oh yeah, that's my husband, or yeah, that's my wife, and yeah, they're on board, and that's all I need, really, right there. It's like, that's it. Cool. Oh, that's great, and just to be clear, at our meeting, I would love it if both of you guys could be there, just so that we can be sure that everybody's on the same page. And frankly, so I don't have to do it twice. Ha 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 ha. And just throw a little joke in like that, right? People get it. I mean, nobody wants to waste time. They don't want their time to be wasted. And honestly, a wife doesn't, well, a lot of people, most of the times, a spouse doesn't want to be in a position of having to convince another person, least of all their husband or wife, to work with somebody. It's much better if you can be there for both of them. So just a little tidbit. And that's really it. So really just want to make sure they're available and just ask, like, so it's looking like I'm free on this time, or if they've already, indicated a time, just to be 100% clear, can John be there as well as you, Julie? Okay, great. And if anything changes, just let me know. Oh, he can't? Okay. Well, if it's okay with you, I'd really love to set up a time where you could both be together. What do you think about that? Oh, okay, sure. Right. And then you just set up a time. Okay. Okay. Now, price, big one. Big one. Before I move on, any questions, thoughts, feedback, concerns? All right. I just want to see a show of hands. How many people have conversations about the price of the home before you show up at the house? Okay. We're going to change that, you guys. All right. So if you're talking to somebody and they've got pie in the sky, like, how do they, for price, how do you know? How do you know? You just come out and ask them, like, yes, yeah, we want to do that. Okay. And there's ways to do that safely, right? These calls, we have to flip our mindset. Like, I think a lot of times I would go into these calls of like, man, I've got to say all the right things so this person works with me, so I can put food on the table. Nothing against really hoping you get a client, but do you want a client who's going to fight you the whole way and it may not end up in a sale? And all that energy and effort you just spent with that client could have been focused on getting another client who is a win, 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 win all the way, just listens and does what you said. So changing that mindset of like, wow, I really hope this works out, I've got to convince them, to instead, they have to convince me to work with them, is huge. Huge mindset shift. They're calling you because they need you. Okay. So keep that in mind. That doesn't mean we get to be haughty and jerks and tell people, make demands of people. It just reframes our mind of really who's in the position of being needed here. Right. And then it kind of we find a mutual need from each other. So here's how I like to bring this up. Julie, you strike me as somebody who's pretty savvy, right? I'm sure you've looked up online the price of your home, some values, maybe on some websites like Zillow or Redfin or Realtor.com or whatever you want to throw out there. So I'm wondering, do you have an idea of realistically what you were thinking in terms of price? Now, I'm being very like calm and I'm drawing out my phrasing there on purpose, because if I'm like, hey, what do you think of price? It's going to catch them off guard. There's no prep for that. So slowly, very just casually, hey, I'm sure you've looked up the value, and believe me, they have. Everybody does. Okay. We live in a world where the value is just out there. Okay. Sometimes it's right, sometimes it's wrong. People don't know that until you talk to them. That's why they're consulting you. So we want to help them with that. So I'm wondering, do you have an idea of realistically of what you're thinking in terms of price? If your conversation's going great, you don't need to prep them for that, fine, just dive right into it. So what were you thinking in terms of price? You're going to know. Some people are just more direct, right? And you can just ask them straight up. And let's say they share a price. Okay. Okay, great. Well, I appreciate your willingness to share that. And, just so you know, my intention is just to gauge your expectation. It's not to pry, or try and catch you off guard. I really just want to have the opportunity to help you maximize that value, right? And get you every penny possible. And this is key, you guys. You have to say something like that, because most people have an opinion that real estate agents are not for them. They're just for the money. They want to pull money away from their house and their transaction. So what we want to do is just immediately speak against that. So my goal, provided I have the opportunity to work with you, is to really help you get every penny possible, because I'm of the mindset that I'd rather earn your business with integrity, right? And being straightforward and honest with you about really what is about reasonable and realistic with regard to the value of your home, rather than like promising you something I know just isn't going to happen. Does that make sense? I'd rather be a person of integrity and tell you straight up what the value is and understand where you're at with that, so that we can find common ground and be on the same page there, rather than me just agreeing to list for you at any price you want. Does that make sense? And they're going to go, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And you know what you did by saying that? You just like pulled an arrow out of your sling and shot the other agent who's just going to come over there and be like, yeah, we can list for whatever. Like, they're gone. I mean, if you're in a competition here and you say something like that, you've just nailed the other agent who isn't confident enough or whatever to be able to have an honest, straightforward discussion with somebody about what their house is worth. So, and I'll just go on. So in preparation for us connecting, I'm going to be doing a lot of homework. I'm going to get with my team or whomever, however you guys are set up, and I'm going to send you an email. And then I just kind of go through what they can expect from here on out. And you guys can frame that however you want to. For me, I send that pre-listing package and I just tell them what's in it. If you'd like to get together on something like that and talk about that specifically, what that could look like for you, if you don't have something like that, just reach out to me. I'd be happy to connect with you on that. But basically, I just want to run through that with them and tell them what their expectation is, what they can expect to hear from me, and then go ahead and set up that appointment. Now that's if they're good on price, if we're aligned, if we've done a little homework before we're good. Now, let's just say that they don't share a price and they go, well, I really like to hear what you have to say first, right? Who's been there? I've heard that, right? Like, well, we're really not sure. We kind of want to hear what you have to say about it. First of all, they do have an idea. Okay, just keep that in mind. They do, and our job is really, we need to be aligned with them. So we're going to just come at this from another angle, right? They're objecting to the question, so we're going to try and take another angle here and look at this as an opportunity to be understood and help them feel understood. Okay, so what I like to say is, sure, I understand. Look, we're going to look at this together as a team, and I'm going to give you some options that you'll have at your disposal, and I'm going to support you 100%. So I want you to know that our interests are in alignment, right? Obviously, we get compensated more the more that you make on the property. So at the same time, I'm committed to earning your business with integrity and transparency versus just promising you the moon and not being able to deliver. Does that sound fair? Right? So the reason we bring that up is because most of the time, a lot of times people have this conception that they want to pick an agent based on who's telling them the highest amount, right? And we're all tempted to do that. I'm tempted to do that. Wouldn't that be great? Just like, yeah, we'll list it for 100,000 more than somebody else, like just to get the deal. Well, it may not end up in a deal. So instead, let's try and cultivate an environment of trustworthiness by just laying that out there. And like, I think I know where you're coming from with that. And I just want to say, like, we're in alignment. I always strive to get as much for the property as I can. For one thing, it means I get paid a little more because we're based on percentages, right? But also, I don't want to promise you the moon and not be able to deliver. So it'd be great if we could just kind of connect on what you're thinking. And if that's in alignment with kind of what I think, or we're in a realistic range, then I think we can take this conversation further. Does that make sense? Right? And it does kind of like, I mean, when you hear language like that, it's sort of like, okay, ball's in your court. Like, it's a little nerve wracking because it means it might not be a deal. But you have to remember, for every conversation you're having that is actually disqualifying somebody, if it turns into that, you can now take the energy you would have spent and learn that later and spend it on getting a good client. Okay. So don't be afraid to let someone go if they're going to fight you on this. It's a huge red flag to me if you find out their motivation is price and price alone, and I will generally not take the listing because I would rather somebody else deal with all of that and I can go do something better. Okay. Sometimes I'll get pushback like, we'd really like to keep that to ourselves. We really want to hear what you have to say first, and we want to interview other agents. I generally just take a similar approach with what I just said. And sometimes I'll get more specific. Like I might throw out some numbers in the price range if I happen to know what the price range is on their property. And if they just share an outlandishly high price with you, that's a really big, like, we need to talk more about this. Okay. We all kind of know, right? We ought to know, like, if we don't know, we need to do more homework. But in general, we should have an idea of like what neighborhoods and what size house, and really kind of within a range of 50K or so, where the house price should fall if we're doing our homework properly. So if they share a crazy high price, we just need to understand why, because there might be something about that house we don't know about. They could be completely right. Okay. They might have just put in some amazing hardscaping in the back that's worth like 60K. And I've seen houses like that. And I've had these conversations where I didn't know that. And then I show up at the listing appointment. I'm like, oh, that's why they're way up here. And I'm in my mind, like like my whole presentation is prepared to bring them down because I didn't have this conversation. So that's where condition comes in. Okay. So gotcha. Thanks for sharing that with me. Would you mind just sharing with me a little bit about the condition of the property? Upgrades, additions, any updates that may have been done over the last few years that you've owned the place? And then they'll go into it if there are some. And if they kind of are stumped on where to lead with that, you can lead them in the conversation. Just kind of start with kitchen, bathrooms, flooring, roof, whatever. Just go through that with them. And if you find out the condition's not there to support the price, then we need to revisit that. We need to come back to that. And this is really kind of high level stuff, okay, guys? But I know you can handle it if you practice. I also have a script that I can send to each one of you that you can look through and adjust, just type it and adjust it the way that it meets how you talk and matches your language. But if they're outlandishly high and the condition's not there to support it, then we have to come back to that. So I like to say, okay, I want you to know I'm really doing my best to support you and your expectation and what you wanted. But at the same time, I'm really not seeing the data to do so. The data is really what kind of shows me an accurate assessment of things. So what I'd like to do is go over some of the recent sales with you in your neighborhood or nearby in hopes that we can really come together and help you decide what is best based on what the market is actually showing us, right? So a fact-based approach, would you be open to that? That's not the same as saying like, hey, your price is too high. That's saying, hey, if we can figure out a way to support that with the data, let's do it, right? But if we can't, let's look at the data and see if that's really the best decision for you to realistically get to Texas 60 days from now or whatever it happens to be. And bringing that sense of their motivation back into the picture at this point realigns them with what their goal really is. Because most people, they'll let 30K go because they value whatever their goal is down the road a lot more than that 30K, especially when they're presented with factual information in a professional and kind way. That just goes to show them, hey, this is going to prevent you from reaching your goal if we take this approach. All right, there's more to that we can do, but really the key is to get back to that motivation, loop that motivation back in there. And I do like to go ahead and have a deeper conversation about condition, even if they're not resistant to price. So let's say they are, if the price is good and we're aligned there, let's say they give a good price, they share the price right away. Okay, cool. Thank you so much for sharing that with me. That sounds good. We can talk more about that when we get together. But for now, I'd love to just kind of get a sense of the property. Have you done any kind of improvements? Have there been any changes recently to the home that you can share with me? They'll go into it. And if they don't cover specific things, just make sure you try to see if you can get some information about kitchen, bathrooms, and bedrooms. Those are the biggest indicators of value. I also like to cover flooring. If I know it's an old house, ask about windows, HVAC, systems, kind of the same thing you ask when you call up a listing agent and say, this information's not out there. If they have the info, you can ask them same kind of things. Also, personally, I like to pull it up on Google Maps, their house, and point out something about the location because it looks pretty. It's like sounds really cool. Like how cool would that be? Hey, yeah, and I'm actually seeing that there's a railroad track behind your house, or there's a poultry barn nearby. Do you get any smells from that, or how's the noise from the railroad? Right? If you've done any work in grottos, or really anywhere in Rockingham County, you're going to run into a railroad or possibly a poultry barn. So it's a good idea at this stage. If you have the address, pull it right up on Google Maps, take a look. Oh, I see you have a pool in your backyard, right? Maybe they didn't mention the pool. So that's just a really good thing to have on hand when you're having these conversations. Just a little side note there. Okay, then we want to go into closing. Okay. And what I mean by that is we want to be kind of closing throughout this conversation. If you were at the presentation at the mastermind event, you've heard me talk about this before, like assumptive closing, okay? Meaning we're speaking to them as if we're already working together. Okay? So I like to just go ahead and use the same thing that I ask at the listing appointment. Hey, it sounds as though based on what you've shared with me that once these improvements are complete, or that you're not going to be making any more improvements before I start to bring buyers through. Is that correct? Right? Or after you make these improvements, you're going to be ready for me to bring buyers through. Throw that in, because then you'll get it's just a quick yes or no and a further conversation, but you're starting to assumptively close at that point. So throw that in. Okay. Before we move on from price and condition and talk about what's owed on the property, that's kind of a lot there. So I just wanted to see if you guys have, so far you've had like no questions, thoughts to share. So, but if anybody does right now, would be a good time. Okay. If I'm not seeing you, just unmute and say something. All right. So anything owed, we got to know this because this is really what people are after, right? They want the net. They want to know how much they're going to take away. And I think if we can have some kind of understanding of what's owed on the property, it shows them that we want to get them that information immediately and do the most accurate price assessment for them from the get-go. And people appreciate that. You just have to say it in a way that's not prying into someone's personal finances because maybe you don't know them. And so it's really just a matter of explaining why, right? So here's what I say. Okay, awesome. Thanks so much for sharing all this with me. We're almost done. Just a couple more things and we'll wrap up. So I'm going to be preparing for you a net sheet, which will show you dollars and cents, a reasonable and realistic range of what you'd be taking home after the sale, so that you can know what you're taking with you to your motivation that we've uncovered, right? So what you can take with you to Texas, or what you can take with you to your next home, or what you can put toward your next property you're investing in, or your next purchase, whatever, okay? So in order to do that properly and professionally, I just need a roundabout. Are there any liens or encumbrances on the property or mortgages on the property? Or is this property free and clear for your family? I'm going to repeat that. So are there any liens or encumbrances or mortgages on the property, or is this property free and clear? So that is a really easy, like professional sounding way of saying what's owed on the property. And you don't have to like ask a question that someone might feel embarrassment or I don't know. Am I the only one who's run into that before? Like there's resistance around that question sometimes. So if I can phrase it in a more kind of like scientific professional way, it goes a lot better. And just be quiet. And they'll just be like, yeah, we owe blank. Or yes, there's a mortgage of, $340,000. Right. And so they'll answer you, right? And so, okay, thank you, right? Thanks for sharing that. So I'm imagining, based on what you shared with me, that you're not interested in acting like a bank yourself and holding a note for a new buyer. You just want for me to help you get all the cash out. Is that right? Who knows what I'm asking there? I want someone to tell me. Who knows what I'm asking? Connie, I see your hand. Unmute yourself and answer.
They're not wanting to owner finance. They're not wanting to take on someone's mortgage. They want to be free and clear of it and move on.
Precisely. Yeah. We need to know that. It's not wrong for someone to owner finance, but we want to just cover that. And this is a way of not bringing up owner financing, like using that phrase, which most people are like, I didn't even know you could do that. What is that? Right. So when we instead say like this, acting like a bank and holding a note for a new buyer, they're going to go like, what? No, why would we? No, we don't want to do that. Okay. Or if they're familiar with that, they'll just flat out say, well, yeah, that's an option. We could possibly do that. I've never gotten that, by the way. If someone's talking to a real estate agent, in almost every case, they don't want to owner finance. Otherwise, they'd be fizboing it because that's usually that same kind of frame of mind. Okay. But that's also a close, right? You just want for me to get all the cash out for you, right? And putting that in a question of yes or no, right? Is that right? We want to get a yes, right? Okay, third close. Okay, great. My intention, provided the opportunity, again, is to do a wonderful job for you and your family, right? So other than what we discussed so far, and hopefully we've covered this in the conversation, we've talked about what they're looking for in an agent, right? In most cases, that's going to come up, and we've filled that in, right? So other than what we've talked about so far, I have a great track record. I can help you get top dollar. I can connect you and refer you to the folks you need to get you from A to B. If you've talked to them about, you can use my moving truck or this or that, or whatever things you've talked about this far, bring those up. You know, I'm going to make sure all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted and even the lowercase J's. Ha 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 ha. Right. Is there anything else that you'd be looking for from me as your agent that would be important to you? And then be quiet. Just let them talk. Is there anything else you'd be looking for from me as your agent that would be important to you? And this is where they're going to start bringing up most of the time service questions, commission questions. Do you do an open house? Right? Like, how do you do all this stuff? You're not going to answer those questions here. That's the temptation is, oh, yeah, my commission is blank. Don't. We're not going to answer those questions because what we want to do is focus on their goals. Okay. We want to focus on what they're trying to do and reorient them to motivation and then assure them that those questions will be answered at our appointment. Okay. So here's how I do that. Yeah, you know, we kind of want to know how much you charge, like what's your commission and, you know, what comes with that. Do you guys do an open house? Do you, you know, are you doing a video tour? Will you do virtual showings? Will you actually show the property? Blah, 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 blah. Okay. Oh, okay, great. Cool. I've made a note of those things here. And we will be sure to discuss all of those during our time together. That's all you got to say. Perfect. Thanks so much for sharing those things with me. We'll be sure to discuss those at our time together. Now, I'm aware that I'm just a voice over the phone at the moment. And so some information I'm going to send you in preparation for connecting is going to help you get a better sense of who I am and what I do and how I do it. So what I like to do, you guys, is I will just tell them, hey, in the signature of my email, there will be a link to my website. Check that out, put a face to the name. There's also a link where you can click some buttons and see some reviews, some testimonials of us online, so you can get a sense of how we do things and our reputation. If you have like a really awesome amount of 5-star reviews, feel free to point it out here. You know, like we have over 100 5-star reviews for our brokerage or 100 5-star reviews for our several whatever, for our last 3 years from clients just like you that we've helped in your area. So I encourage you to take a look at a few of those, probably not all of them, but a few of them, right? And that way you can get a feel and a flavor for the service and the results we provide, okay? Right? So that's just reorienting them and saying, hey, I hear all your questions. I hear all your things. This is a longer conversation. We'll cover all of that in our appointment. And in the meantime, I'm going to send you an email, take a look at all this stuff and familiarize yourself. And they just feel really good. It's like, oh, that makes sense. Yeah, we don't have time for all that. I'll just check it out online. Perfect. And it just kind of reverse engineers the way we naturally make decisions. So like, instead of us saying, hey, I'm so great, here's all the things I do, and here's how much I charge on this first phone call, which never goes well, because then they're just going to call the next one and be like, well, will you charge less? Like, we don't want to do that. Instead, let's let the tech do it for us that's out there. Let's just show off what we have and put that in a safe framework of how we say it, right? Does that make sense? Nod your head if that makes sense, or give me a thumbs up if that makes sense. I think I remember just kind of panic. Like, we can avoid these panic moments in these conversations. Well, what's your commission? You know, I'm really glad you asked. I can't wait to share that with you when we get together. And the reason I don't have a solid answer for you now is because I'm flexible, and I can assure you that won't be a reason that won't be a reason we don't work together. I'm sure we'll come up with something that's mutually fair and beneficial to both parties based on what you need and what I can provide. And in the meantime, I'd love for you to check out services on my website, and here's a link and blah, blah, blah. Okay. Okay. Always end with some sort of question. Does that make sense? Is that fair enough? Like, okay. And yeah, sure, that makes sense. And if you're getting pushback, red flag, right? If someone's going, well, I really don't want to have an appointment until I know your commission. You know, if you're getting pushback, that's a red flag. And we can talk in another conversation about how to handle some of those types of objections, because there's ways around those too. But yeah, then, I mean, it's really just a final close. It's setting the appointment at that point. You know, what I like to do is I like to go ahead and tell them I'm going to ask them to hire me. And how do I do that? Right. There's a couple ways. I think once you have that last little mini conversation about putting their concerns and thoughts to rest about services and commission and everything, I like to just sort of give a phrase that brings everything back to like a wrap up point, right? We've done a lot here. This has been 15 to 20 minutes probably. Okay, Julie, I've asked you a bunch of questions. Do you have any other questions or concerns for me? They'll tell you, okay, I've noted those, and I'll be sure to cover those. If you like, you're gonna be tempted to answer. Do not. If it's a quick little like something about when you're coming or timing of the meeting, that's fine. But if it's questions about services and things, just I've noted those and we'll be sure to talk about those in our meeting. All right. Then you strike me as somebody who's like super straightforward. And I'm the exact same way. And I can tell in speaking to you, you've really thought this through. And it's not just a question of if you're going to do this, right? Because we wouldn't have made it far in this conversation if we'd be done. So it's not a question of if you're going to do this. It's just a question of when and who you're going to work with. So when we connect, provided that it makes sense, of course, the numbers work, you feel comfortable and confident with me and my team that we can help. You do that due diligence, you check me out online, you see my track record, you see reviews, and it seems as though you'd be open to the possibility of hiring me to help when I see you at our meeting. Is that right? And then be quiet. It's not saying, hey, I'm going to bring paperwork. I'm going to bring paperwork with me so we can sign at our meeting. That's too intimidating at this stage. We want to just ask if they're open. Are you? I mean, of course they're open to it, you guys. They wouldn't be on the phone call, right? And I know we're pressed on time here for our meeting. We're going to wrap up in just a few minutes. But yeah, really, it's like we're just assuring them, hey, after you feel comfortable and confident, and you've done your homework, we've done our homework. If we're aligned at our meeting, it seems as though you would be open to the possibility of hiring me to help when I see you there. Is that right? It's a leading question. It seems as though you don't have to use that phrasing if it doesn't seem that way. But this is a way, again, of kind of doing that assumptive close. Okay. And usually you'll get, yeah, we're sure, of course, we're open to it. Yeah. Awesome. Cool. So what I'll do is I'll bring with me the analysis that I'm going to be sending over to you in your pre-listing package email. And we'll sit down as a team and figure out strategically how we can position you and your home on the market for sale so we can make sure to get you guys top dollar for your home. And then I'll also have with me, now at this point, we can do this. I will also have with me the appropriate documentation, the listing paperwork. So that provided it all makes sense and you and your wife or you and your family or whoever feel comfortable and confident, we can take care of that and go ahead and get started. Fair enough? So now they're not surprised when you go and you bring the paperwork. You don't like, they're ready. They said they're open to it. So now we're just saying, okay, here's what that would look like. Okay. Yeah, that's fair. Sure. Well, we're not sure yet. They might say that. Okay. Yeah, I totally understand. Nothing's ever a problem, you guys. Okay. Yeah, I understand. I know it's a big decision and you want to make sure that you're making the best decision possible, and here's where you can share a little bit about your track record in a humble way if you want to. I mean this very humbly. I really do. 95% of the time when I meet with someone in person, particularly when they've had the chance to see our track record, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they do end up deciding to hire me. And I just want to be clear. I'm not here to talk you into anything, but that is my intention. That is my intention, would be to work with you if we're all comfortable and confident. So I will send that pre-listing, just reiterate. So I'll be sending that pre-listing package over to you via email. Feel free to check things out there. And I'll also, when I come to meet with you, I will have the appropriate documentation so that we can take care of that and get the process started if you reach that conclusion. Fair enough. So it's really just a repeating of it. Like, well, hey, aren't you really open to it? Because I think you really are, right? You wouldn't be calling me if you weren't. So that's called like looking at objection, picking it up and setting it aside. It's really, we're just trying to be understood here, right? So I just want you to know I'm going to be prepared. And even if you're not ready at that stage, I just want you to know I'll be prepared in case you are. That's all. That's all we're saying. Very safe. And then you just set the appointment. That's it. I mean, I think I'm pretty long-winded. And so you might be able to figure out a way to do this with less words. But I've found that when I can include statements like, I'm not going to talk you into anything, We are aligned. I really want to get the most for your house because I'm paid more when you make more. These kinds of things are just really good assurances to people. So throwing those in has just been very, very helpful. And it takes down this, I don't know you, you're going to sell to me, you're going to make me do something I don't want to do. It takes that kind of veil or that tension away and just shows you're a real person who's a professional and knows what they're doing. So when you have conversations like this and you see more than one or two red flags, you're going to have to learn to circumvent out and be like, if they're stuck on a price, well, I'm not going to list it for lower than this amount. And you just know, and you can't get around that. If you have that data conversation and you say, yeah, I can understand where you're coming from on that. I'll just be so totally open with you and straightforward because I'd rather earn your business with integrity than just promise you the moon. I really don't see the data to support that. Would you be open to going over the data with me that I see so that you can be 100% sure that nothing will impede you from getting from here to your next destination? And if they say no, okay, well, I appreciate your time. Is it all right if I just keep you in my database and we'll remain in touch? And if you change your mind, I'd be happy to hear from you. Off the phone, gone. Cool. Didn't waste my time. Didn't have to prepare a CMA. Didn't have to go to somebody's house to discover they're not really willing to be flexible and listen to a real estate agent. I just saved 4 to 5 hours of my life, maybe more, depending on the house and what it needs and when the appointment is and how far away it is. So these conversations really can't go a wrong way if you're having them. It's just kind of a mindset thing and reminding yourself that the more I know about someone's situation, the better equipped I am to help them. And better is always better. You guys have been awesome. I'm going to open it up for questions, thoughts, comments. If nobody has any, we'll just sign off here. But I really, really appreciate you guys here today, being here today. And this has been fun. This is fun for me to do. So thanks so much for joining. Thoughts, questions, things you've run into. Go ahead. Who's talking?
Zach, just real quick, wanted to thank you for putting things like this on. Sometimes in the community, at least from a new agent or newer agent perspective, there is not really a focus on collaboration, but more competition. And so having opportunities like this to really mastermind, even in a small group, and just share knowledge and insight is very helpful. So I just wanted to thank you for putting things like this together and for all the events that you guys have held up there, and just want to know that you are appreciated, brother. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Steve. That means a lot. I'm glad you're learning from it. Thank you.
Hey, Zach, I got a question or thought, or not thought. I'm asking for feedback.
Go ahead.
So one listing that I had in the beginning, and it's interesting because, I have the venue, so I'm very comfortable with talking with people and kind of closing that piece of it. So that sales pitch piece isn't new to me. What caught me off guard is literally the seller would not disclose what she owed, like walking away, what she needed, any of that. But then it was just the biggest struggle. Like, she was very secretive with all of that, with her payoff. I find out at a certain point, like she had a HELOC, no big deal, but it would have been helpful to have known some of these factors. And, and I would ask different ways, and I've been an interviewer, so like I would kind of soften the question and ask it at a different angle, trying to get the answer. And I literally could never get her to disclose any of that information. It was just like top secret. She wasn't coming off of it. And it wasn't until like we're getting close to closing that I then find out what she owes. And I kept saying, it's kind of hard. Like, it really would be helpful if you would let me know some of this information. I understand you're private. I'm not going to share it. But it helps us understand what you need at the end of the day. Like, what is it you absolutely need to walk away with for this? And it was an act of Congress.
Yeah. I hear you. And I think that there are homeowners that, they just want to keep certain things private. Two things. So
have you had anybody like that?
Yeah. I was going to say, thanks for sharing your experience. I was was wondering if you had a specific question about that. But yeah, I've run into that before. In most cases, I'm able to overcome that kind of in the ways that you just described by just asking it in a different way or explaining how I can be more beneficial to them and really give the best service that I possibly can if I have a full understanding. And other times I'll just ask why. And just say something like, hey, I'm just kind of getting the sense that you'd really like to keep that information private. Just so you know, we're aligned on getting the most that we can for the property. But I do want to make sure that whatever we sell the property for is going to cover any debt that you have. Does that make sense? Yes. Well, it definitely, and they'll go, yeah, that makes sense. And it definitely will. And if at that point they're like saying it definitely will, then I'm okay. Because that's really all I need to know. I'm not going to go get into this if, you know, they're underwater on their mortgage, then we need to know that. And I've actually, early in my career, I actually had a listing appointment, brought paperwork with me, had a verbal agreement from somebody to sign their house. And then I get a call from the spouse who is in prison. Okay. And says, and don't you love Zillow leads, by the way? And says, hey, I don't think she knew this, but we owe more on the house than what you can get for it. So you're not going to be able to sell the house for us. I'm like, oh, okay. Thanks for calling and telling me, because you don't want to be in that situation.
Right.
But yeah, I would say you can only push somebody so much. And if they don't want to share something with you and it's not a deal breaker for you for any other reason, and you're confident that you can sell the house for, you know, and you get at least a yes to the debt question I just asked, I would say there's no reason to not work with them.
Yeah, it just was very, it was unnecessary stress for
Sure.
her and for me because, you know, we never knew. Well, I felt like I was putting my hand into a bag and not looking to see what we were pulling out.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
she kept asking, you know, I'm worried we're not going to have enough. And I'm like, well, I don't know what enough is.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I do have, I do think depending on the level of relationship as well, you can ask a why question, you know. Hey, a lot of times people really appreciate it when you're when you're really listening to them and you're intuitive with them. So, hey, it seems like you're kind of holding back this information, and respell out what you know, why it can be helpful. And then just go to, you know, I don't mean to pry, you know, or invade your personal space at all. I can best help you when we're aligned and we're in tune with everything that's needed for you to succeed in this transaction. Is there any particular reason that you don't want to share that information with me? And then be quiet. And that puts them in a position of having to answer. And there might be a perfectly good, reasonable explanation. We're not trying to test them or put them on the spot. That's just like a normal human conversation. Like, hey, I care about you and I'm noticing this. What's going on? You know, like, what's going on here? And then, you know, they might say, well, you know, I just feel like I don't know you all that well. And I'm afraid that if I share that with you, you won't sell the house for as much. Because that's usually what's in there. It's like, well, if they know that number, they're just going to put a price on it to just get that taken care of. And maybe it's only 40 grand under what you can get the house for, you know? So if you can understand the why, then you can work through that, right? Oh, well, that makes total sense. I can understand why you might be concerned with that. But I just want to assure you, we're aligned on getting the most for the house because I get paid more when you make more. And I always want to get paid more, right? And have a little chuckle. Also, the data here is showing what it's showing. And I just want to make sure we're aligned on that, blah, 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 and go right back into it. But that's a really high level technique. And if you're feeling like it's already a high pressure conversation or there's a lot of tension, I'm not sure you can go there in that conversation. But hopefully that's helpful if you run into that again. It's pretty rare, I think.
good, thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else? Questions, thoughts? Okay.
I have a question on is it okay to ask a question on Zillow leads?
Yeah, so ask whatever you want. Go ahead.
Okay. So like we get so many of the Zillow leads and they're dead ends.
Yeah, sure.
Do you have a honed in way that you have found works for you to be better prepared to know whether it's a good lead or it's not worth my time to go out and follow up on this one.
Sure, sure. So, Zillow leads are pretty rare for listings, right?
Mm.
We're focused
Yep.
on
Yeah,
that.
that's something about, I know.
It's okay.
That one has that too,
Yeah, that's fine.
for the
So we're,
buyers.
yep. So my general rule of thumb is if someone's not willing to schedule a phone call with me,
Right.
I'm not willing to work with them or give them my time.
Okay.
And I think for me, that's a boundary that I just want to put in place for my own sanity, because if I'm gonna open up my schedule to people who just want to go look at a house because they think it looks cool and they haven't done their financial homework, or they saw the Zillow number online for the value and the neighbor's house sold for so much more, but their house is half the size. Like I'm not interested in going even on the I'm not interested in going to anyone's property without having a phone call first. So for me, that's the fence.
Right.
And I think we have to ask people to go over a fence, and honestly, at numerous fences,
Yes.
in order to know how committed they are.
Right.
And that is for their own good. So when we get into a mindset of what's good for this person, instead of a panic mode of how do I make this work for me, we're a lot more confident with these conversations, because if you're any kind of decent person, you want to live by the golden rule and do
Right.
like, if let's say you're in their shoes, oh, I'm really excited. There's nothing wrong with this. I'm really excited. I want to see this house. There's nothing wrong with that. Wow, that's great. I'd love to hear more about why you're so excited, right? Let's go with it. Let them lead, right? If they're not willing to have a conversation, they're like, well, we really just want to see it. Okay. I'd love to put you in touch with the listing agent who can help you with that. Right.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
If you're looking for buyer representation, that's really a longer conversation so that we can understand the complete process of how I can help you purchase that home with confidence if it's the right one for you. Would you be open to that? Right. So you can sit down and kind of just put these scenarios to yourself. How would I like to be responded to if I were in their shoes? And kind of come up with your own scripting with some of that. But the more you practice it, the more it's just second nature. And I think for most agents that I've helped with this, once they have that mindset of my time is valuable and so is theirs, and I'm protecting their time as well as mine, it becomes a lot easier.
I never ever even gave the thought of turning back over to the listing agent a thought.
Yeah, I mean,
well, now.
yeah, well, and so it really doesn't matter. You can do whatever you want, but I mean, if it's a lead that's not willing to talk with you, why would you want to work with them?
Right. Yeah.
I think we get into this mindset of like, well, I have to make it work to put food on the table. Well, you don't. You don't. When we that's actually working against what puts food on the table. What's better is spending your energy on leads that are comfortable and confident and want to work with you.
Yeah. That's where I have to echo what Steve said, because I'm glad to hear that not just myself feels like it's hard to network. I don't know that it's hard to network, but I do think that the aura is there that we really don't network. And so I'm glad you're doing these classes so that we can meet each other and work together.
Sounds good. Yeah, happy to. Glad you're learning from it. All right. Well, I think that's all the time we really have. We've been on here for like an hour and 20 minutes. So I'm going to hop off and get some other work done. Good luck to everybody. Hope you all have a fantastic year, and let's keep in touch. And if you guys have any specific things you want to talk with me about, objection handling, business planning, whatever's on your mind, feel free to hit me up anytime. You can text me, email me, and we'll grab lunch or breakfast or coffee or whatever you want. All right. Take care, everybody. Have a good day.